to humiliate himself in front of the entire staff, or that his mistake would cost him far more than just his pride. The elegant interior of Le Maison d'Or gleamed with old-world luxury, crystal chandeliers casting warm light across polished mahogany and crisp white tablecloths. As one of Boston's most prestigious restaurants, it had hosted generations of the city's elite, from political dynasties to tech billionaires. Every detail, from the hand-painted ceiling murals to the antique silver service, spoke of tradition and exclusivity. Michael Thompson had been managing Le Maison d'Or for 6 years, and he took pride in maintaining its reputation for excellence and exclusivity. At 45, his perfectly tailored suit and meticulously groomed appearance matched the restaurant's refined atmosphere. He had worked his way up through some of the finest establishments in Europe before landing this coveted position, and he never let anyone forget it. The evening had started like any other, with the usual crowd of wealthy regulars and occasional celebrities occupying the coveted window tables. The soft murmur of conversation mixed with the gentle clink of fine china and crystal, creating the sophisticated ambience that Le Maison d'Or was famous for. Thompson stood at his usual post near the host station, surveying his domain with the critical eye of someone who considered themselves the keeper of standards. What he didn't know was that earlier that day, a significant change had occurred in the restaurant's ownership. The prestigious Le Maison d'Or Group, which owned the restaurant along with several other high-end establishments across the country, had just undergone a major leadership transition. The aging owner, Jean-Paul Dumont, had finally decided to step down, passing control to a new generation of leadership. The first hint that this evening would be different came when Thompson noticed a young woman being seated at one of the premium tables, a booth usually reserved for the restaurant's most distinguished guests. Her appearance immediately caught his attention, but not in the way the restaurant's usual clientele did. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, wearing a simple navy blazer and white blouse rather than the designer labels he was accustomed to seeing. Karoline Leavitt had arrived early for her dinner meeting, intentionally choosing to observe the restaurant's operations before making her presence known. At 25, she had already accomplished what many considered impossible, rising from a small-town New Hampshire background to become one of the youngest and most successful executives in the hospitality industry. But tonight, she wasn't interested in announcing her position. She wanted to see how the restaurant really operated when they thought no one important was watching. Thompson's reaction to her presence was immediate and visible. His lip curled slightly as he watched her examine the menu, his eyes taking in her practical business attire with barely concealed disdain. In his mind, Le Maison d'Or's standards were being compromised by allowing someone so obviously out of place to occupy one of their best tables. The other staff members noticed their manager's reaction, exchanging glances as Thompson made his way toward the young woman's table. They had seen this behavior before, his particular way of making guests he deemed unworthy feel unwelcome, while maintaining just enough professional polish to avoid outright complaints. What made this situation particularly interesting was Karoline's demeanor. Unlike most guests who found themselves under Thompson's scrutiny, she showed no sign of discomfort or intimidation. She sat with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned their place in the world, regardless of others' opinions. Her eyes moved thoughtfully over the menu, occasionally glancing around the restaurant with an analytical gaze that would have worried Thompson had he been paying closer attention. The evening's regular customers continued their meals, unaware that they were about to witness something extraordinary. The sommelier was in the middle of presenting a rare vintage to a table of investment bankers when Thompson reached Karoline's booth, his posture radiating the kind of superiority that comes from years of wielding small amounts of power. Several servers had positioned themselves to watch the interaction, having endured Thompson's elitist attitude themselves over the years. They could sense something different about this guest, a quiet authority that their manager, in his arrogance, was completely missing. Thompson's first words to Karoline would soon become legendary among the staff, repeated in break rooms and industry gatherings for months to come. But what made the moment truly extraordinary wasn't just what he said, it was how his target responded, and the chain of events that her response would set in motion. The senior waiter, James, who had been with the restaurant for over 2 decades, noticed something in Karoline's bearing that made him pause in polishing wine glasses. In 30 years of fine dining service, he had developed an almost sixth sense for recognizing truly important people, not just the wealthy or famous, but those who carried real authority. Something about this young woman's composed demeanor sent warning signals that Thompson was too arrogant to notice. The maitre d', Antoine, who had worked in some of the finest restaurants in Paris, also recognized the signs. He tried to catch Thompson's eye, to warn him off what was about to become a catastrophic mistake. But the manager was too focused on what he saw as an opportunity to demonstrate his authority, too confident in his position to imagine it might be at risk. As Thompson approached Karoline's table, the subtle sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. The soft jazz from the piano bar, the gentle clink of fine china, the murmur of sophisticated conversation, all seemed to dim in anticipation of what was about to unfold. Even the flames of the elegant candles appeared to flicker more intensely, as if they too were aware of the impending confrontation. Stay tuned to see what happens when this arrogant restaurant manager learns the true cost of judging a book by its cover. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories about powerful moments of justice and humility. Michael Thompson's approach to Karoline's table carried all the practiced superiority of someone who had spent years wielding small amounts of power over others. His perfectly polished shoes made soft sounds against the expensive carpet as he positioned himself at the edge of her booth, deliberately standing rather than sitting to maintain his imagined position of authority. "Good evening," he began, his tone carrying that particular blend of condescension and false courtesy that seasoned service professionals use when they want to make someone feel unwelcome. "I couldn't help but notice you've been seated at one of our premium tables." His emphasis on the word premium made his meaning clear. He didn't think she belonged there. Karoline looked up from her menu, her expression composed but interested, like a scientist observing a particularly fascinating specimen. Her response was measured, professional, and carried none of the defensiveness Thompson had expected. "Yes, it's a lovely table. The view of the garden through these windows is particularly nice." Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had navigated far more challenging situations than an arrogant restaurant manager. Thompson's lips tightened slightly at her calm response. He was used to people either becoming defensive or uncomfortable under his scrutiny. This young woman's composure irritated him, making him push further. "These particular tables are usually reserved for our more established clientele." His pause before established was deliberate, designed to emphasize what he saw as the obvious gap between her and the restaurant's usual customers. The senior waiter, James, had edged closer under the pretense of adjusting table settings nearby. In his 30 years of service, he had developed an almost sixth sense for detecting when situations were about to go badly wrong. Something in Karoline's composed demeanor sent warning signals that Thompson was too arrogant to notice. "Is that so?" Karoline replied, her tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. "And what exactly defines established in your view, Mr. Thompson?" The fact that she knew his name without him having introduced himself should have been his first warning, but his own sense of superiority had blinded him to the subtle signs of her authority. The restaurant's ambient sounds seemed to fade into the background as other diners began to notice the interaction. The soft piano music from the bar area continued, but conversations at nearby tables grew quieter as people picked up on the building tension. The sommelier paused in his wine presentation at a nearby table, recognizing that something unprecedented was unfolding. Thompson, emboldened by what he mistook for naivety, leaned in slightly. "Le Maison d'Or has certain standards to maintain. Our regular clientele expects a particular atmosphere." His gesture took in her simple navy blazer and practical business attire, making it clear he found them wanting compared to the designer labels worn by other diners. The maitre d', Antoine, who had worked in Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe, recognized the signs of impending disaster. He tried to catch Thompson's eye, to warn him off what was about to become a catastrophic mistake. But the manager was too focused on what he saw as an opportunity to demonstrate his authority. Karoline's response was unexpected. Instead of becoming defensive or angry, she pulled out a small notebook and began writing. "Please, Mr. Thompson, tell me more about these standards." I'm particularly interested in how you determine which guests are worthy of your premium tables. Her tone was professional, almost like someone conducting a performance review. This unusual reaction threw Thompson slightly off balance, but he was too committed to his course of action to back down now. Our premium tables are typically reserved for guests who understand and appreciate the finer things in life. People who are familiar with the proper etiquette of fine dining. His implication was clear. He didn't believe she fell into either category. Several servers had gathered near the service station, watching the interaction with a mixture of horror and fascination. They had endured Thompson's elitist attitude themselves over the years, but never had they seen him be quite so blatant with a guest. Something about this young woman's calm demeanor made his behavior seem even more inappropriate than usual. The tension in the restaurant continued to build as Karoline made another note in her book. And these standards, are they written somewhere? Part of the restaurant's official policies. Her questions were precise, professional, and somehow made Thompson's position seem increasingly precarious. Other diners had begun to take notice of the confrontation, though it was happening too quietly to disturb their meals. A couple at a nearby table exchanged glances, the woman shaking her head slightly at Thompson's obvious condescension. A regular customer, a prominent Boston attorney, watched with particular interest, recognizing something in Karoline's demeanor that Thompson was missing entirely. Our standards are based on years of tradition and experience, Thompson replied, his tone growing more defensive as he sensed he was somehow losing control of the conversation. I've personally managed this establishment for 6 years, and I know what our clientele expects. Karoline nodded thoughtfully, making another note. 6 years as manager. And before that? Her question was casual but carried an undertone that made several of the watching staff members exchange knowing looks. They had never heard anyone question Thompson's authority so calmly and effectively. The restaurant's soft lighting seemed to highlight the growing discomfort on Thompson's face as he realized this conversation wasn't going as he had planned. The crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows across the scene, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere for what was about to become a legendary moment in the restaurant's history. I've worked in some of the finest establishments in Europe, Thompson began, his voice taking on the pompous tone he used when recounting his professional history. Places where understanding proper standards and maintaining appropriate atmospheres are essential to success. As he spoke, Karoline glanced at her watch, then surveyed the restaurant with new interest. The dinner service was in full swing, with every table occupied and the staff moving through their well-rehearsed choreography of high-end service. Everything was running smoothly, except for the manager who had abandoned his post to try to intimidate a guest he deemed unworthy. "Tell me, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume that nearby tables could hear clearly, "in all your experience with fine dining establishments, have you ever encountered a situation where a manager publicly questioned a guest's right to be seated at a particular table?" The question hung in the air like crystal suspended in light. Several of the senior staff members winced, recognizing the professional trap that Thompson had walked into. The attorney at the nearby table actually set down his fork to watch more attentively, recognizing the skill with which this young woman was handling the situation. Thompson's face flushed slightly as he realized he had been maneuvered into an uncomfortable position. But rather than backing down, he made the fatal mistake of doubling down on his assumptions. Perhaps if you're unfamiliar with establishments of this caliber, you would be more comfortable dining elsewhere. I can recommend several more suitable options in the area. The soft gasp from a nearby table was audible in the sudden quiet. Even the pianist seemed to play more softly, as if providing appropriate background music for the drama unfolding in the dining room. But what happened next would transform this from a simple confrontation into a moment that would be discussed in hospitality management courses for years to come. Stay tuned to see how this young woman turns the tables on an arrogant manager, teaching him and everyone present an unforgettable lesson about judgment and authority. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories about powerful moments of justice served with perfect professionalism. What happened next in La Maison d'Or would become the stuff of restaurant industry legend. Karoline Leavitt closed her notebook with a deliberate motion that somehow commanded attention from everyone within earshot. Her composed demeanor hadn't changed, but something in her bearing shifted subtly, like a chess master about to reveal a carefully planned checkmate. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that needs no volume to command attention, "I appreciate your concern about maintaining standards. In fact, that's exactly why I'm here tonight." She reached into her briefcase, retrieving a slim leather portfolio embossed with the Le Maison d'Or Group's logo. The maitre d' Antoine recognized the portfolio immediately. His face went pale as he realized what it signified. It was the type of portfolio carried only by the restaurant group's senior executives during formal inspections. Thompson, still caught up in his own sense of superiority, missed this crucial detail entirely. "I don't know what marketing materials you're carrying," Thompson said dismissively, "but they don't change the fact that..." Karoline raised her hand slightly, the gesture so authoritative that Thompson found himself falling silent mid-sentence, much to the amazement of the watching staff. "Let me share something interesting with you," Karoline continued, opening the portfolio. "This morning, I participated in a board meeting where Jean-Paul Dumont officially stepped down as CEO of the Le Maison d'Or Group." She paused, allowing the significance of this information to register. "Would you like to know who was unanimously selected as his successor?" The attorney at the nearby table actually set down his wineglass, recognizing the professional execution he was witnessing. Around the restaurant, conversations had died down as other diners sensed they were watching something extraordinary unfold. The senior waiter, James, had to suppress a smile as he saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross Thompson's face. "I've received no communication about any leadership changes," Thompson replied, but his voice had lost some of its previous confidence. The crystal chandeliers seemed to cast harsher shadows across his face as he shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that the situation might be slipping out of his control. Karoline's response was measured and precise. "That's interesting, considering the memo was sent to all management staff 3 hours ago." She turned a page in her portfolio. "In fact, I'm looking at the delivery confirmation right now. It was received and opened on your office computer at 4:47 p.m. The sommelier nearly dropped the bottle he was holding as he realized what was happening. Other staff members exchanged glances, years of forced deference to Thompson's arrogance about to be dramatically reversed. The pianist, sensing the mood, had subtly shifted to playing something with a more dramatic undertone. "I've been busy with dinner service preparations," Thompson began, but Karoline continued as if he hadn't spoken, her voice maintaining its professional calm. "The memo outlined several significant changes coming to Le Maison d'Or Group properties," she said, consulting her notes, "including a comprehensive review of management practices, customer service standards, and..." She looked up, meeting Thompson's increasingly worried gaze, "staff treatment policies." The restaurant's elegant atmosphere seemed to crackle with tension as other diners openly turned to watch the interaction. The couple at the next table had completely abandoned any pretense of focusing on their meal, the woman hiding a smile behind her napkin as she watched Thompson's composure continue to crumble. "Perhaps," Thompson said, his voice notably less confident now, "we should continue this discussion in my office." He had finally recognized that something was very wrong, but still didn't fully grasp the extent of his mistake. "I think right here is perfect," Karoline replied, her tone pleasant but firm. "After all, you chose to have our initial interaction in front of your staff and guests. It seems appropriate to continue in the same vein." Several servers had to turn away to hide their expressions as they witnessed their manager's authority being systematically dismantled. Antoine, the maitre d', had moved closer, his experienced eye recognizing the shifting power dynamic. He had survived decades in the high-end restaurant industry by knowing exactly when and how to align himself with real authority. His slight nod toward Karoline did not go unnoticed by the staff. "Now," Karoline continued, turning another page in her portfolio, "let's discuss your approach to determining which guests are worthy of premium seating. I'm particularly interested in how this aligns with our company's official policies on customer service and equal treatment." The attorney at the nearby table was now openly taking notes on his phone, clearly impressed by the masterclass in professional confrontation he was witnessing. Other diners had shifted their chairs slightly, not wanting to miss a moment of what was unfolding before them. Thompson's face had taken on a distinctly gray pallor as the reality of his situation began to dawn on him. The very premium table he had tried to declare off-limits was now feeling like a trap, with him caught in the spotlight of his own making. The crystal glasses on nearby tables seemed to vibrate slightly with the tension in the air. "Ms. Leavitt," he began, finally using her name, though he still didn't understand exactly who she was. Perhaps I was too hasty in my assessment, but once again, Karoline smoothly interrupted his attempt at backtracking. "Tell me more about these more suitable restaurants you were about to recommend," she said, her pen poised above her notebook. "I'm sure our marketing team would be fascinated to know which establishments you consider more appropriate for certain customers." The soft lighting that had earlier seemed so elegant now felt more like a theatrical spotlight, illuminating every bead of sweat that had begun to appear on Thompson's forehead. The watching staff members, who had endured years of his condescension, were witnessing something they had only dreamed about, their manager's carefully constructed authority crumbling before their eyes. "Of course," Thompson stammered, "I would never actually suggest that any customer should dine elsewhere. I was merely trying to ensure that our standards—" He fell silent as Karoline held up a hand again, the gesture somehow more powerful than any words could have been. The moment had come. Every person in the restaurant could sense it, from the seasoned servers to the wealthy regular customers, all of them waiting to see exactly how this remarkable scene would conclude. The pianist had actually stopped playing entirely, as if providing a dramatic pause for what was about to happen. But before Karoline could deliver her final revelation, something unexpected occurred that would make this moment even more memorable. A familiar figure appeared at the restaurant's entrance, someone whose presence would transform this from a simple lesson in humility to a moment that would reshape the entire organization. Stay tuned to see the shocking arrival that leaves Thompson speechless and transforms this confrontation into a legendary moment in restaurant industry history. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of justice served with perfect professionalism. Jean-Paul Dumont himself stood in the doorway of La Maison d'Or, his distinguished presence immediately recognized by every staff member. The former CEO's silver hair and impeccable suit were as much a part of the restaurant's legend as its crystal chandeliers and vintage wine cellar. But it was the warm smile he directed at Karoline that caught everyone's attention. "Ah, I see you've met my successor," Dumont said, his French accent adding gravity to his words as he approached the table. Thompson's face, already pale, now took on an almost ghostly quality as the full impact of his mistake began to dawn on him. The restaurant had gone completely silent, even the kitchen staff emerging to witness this historic moment. "Mr. Dumont," Thompson managed to stammer, "I wasn't expecting," but Dumont raised his hand in a gesture remarkably similar to Karoline's earlier ones, silencing the manager mid-sentence. The former CEO's expression was one of disappointed understanding, like a teacher who had caught a student failing to learn an important lesson. "Ms. Leavitt," Dumont said, turning to Karoline with obvious respect, "I trust you're finding your inspection illuminating?" His choice of words caused several staff members to exchange knowing looks. They had all suspected this evening was more than just a casual dinner visit, but now the full scope of their manager's mistake was becoming clear. Karoline's response demonstrated exactly why she had been chosen to lead the company. "Very illuminating, Mr. Dumont. In fact, Mr. Thompson has been providing an excellent example of exactly why our new customer service initiatives are so necessary." Her voice remained professional and calm, but there was no mistaking the authority it carried. The attorney at the nearby table had abandoned any pretense of dining, now openly recording the interaction on his phone. Other customers watched in fascination as years of Thompson's carefully cultivated superiority crumbled in the face of true leadership. The crystal chandeliers seemed to sparkle more intensely, as if providing spotlight illumination for this moment of justice. "Perhaps," Thompson began, his voice now barely above a whisper, "we should discuss this in private," but once again he was interrupted, this time by Dumont. "On the contrary," the former CEO said, "I believe this is exactly the right setting for this discussion. After all, a restaurant's true character is shown in how it treats every guest, not just the ones we think are important. His words carried the weight of decades of experience in luxury hospitality. Karoline opened her portfolio once more, but now her expression had softened slightly. Mr. Thompson, when I accepted the position of CEO, I made a promise to every employee and customer of the Le Maison d'Or Group. Would you like to know what that promise was? The watching staff leaned forward slightly, sensing that they were about to witness something more than just their manager's humiliation. This was about to become a moment that would define the company's future direction. I promised, Karoline continued, that we would maintain our high standards not by excluding people, but by welcoming them. That true luxury isn't about keeping people out, it's about inviting them in. That every guest who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with the same respect and dignity, regardless of what they're wearing or how they look. The senior waiter, James, found himself nodding along with her words. In his 30 years of service, he had seen countless examples of how Thompson's brand of elitism had hurt both the staff and the restaurant's reputation. This young woman was articulating something he had always believed but never had the authority to express. Dumont moved to stand beside Karoline, the gesture clearly showing where the power now resided. Ms. Leavitt represents everything I hoped for in a successor, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed restaurant. Someone who understands that true excellence comes from how we treat people, not how we judge them. Thompson's attempts to maintain his composure had completely failed. Sweat visibly beaded on his forehead as he realized that his 6-year reign of condescension and elitism was about to end. The watching staff members could hardly contain their satisfaction as they witnessed karma being served with perfect timing and professionalism. But what happened next demonstrated why Karoline had been chosen to lead one of the world's most prestigious restaurant groups. Instead of publicly firing Thompson as many expected and some hoped, she did something far more powerful. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice now carrying a note of genuine concern, I believe you have the technical skills to be an excellent manager. Your attention to detail, your knowledge of fine dining, your commitment to quality, these are all valuable assets. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. What you lack is an understanding of true hospitality. The restaurant remained silent as she continued, I'm prepared to offer you a choice. You can either tender your resignation, effective immediately, or you can accept a position in our new management training program, where you'll learn what real luxury hospitality means by working every position in the restaurant, from dishwasher to host. This unexpected offer caused a stir among the watching staff. It was a masterclass in leadership, offering redemption while maintaining authority, showing compassion while ensuring accountability. Even Dumont looked impressed by his successor's handling of the situation. Thompson, his face now flushed with a mixture of shame and relief, struggled to find his voice. I would be grateful for the opportunity to learn, he managed finally, the admission of his need for education perhaps the most surprising development of the evening. Karoline nodded, satisfied. Excellent. You'll start tomorrow as a busboy. James will be your supervisor. Her gesture toward the senior waiter, who had endured years of Thompson's arrogance, caused several staff members to break into spontaneous smiles. The impact of this moment rippled through the restaurant like waves in a still pond. Servers stood straighter, hostesses smiled more genuinely, and even the kitchen staff felt a surge of pride in their workplace. This was more than just a management change, it was a transformation in the very culture of Le Maison d'Or. Dumont, watching his successor handle the situation with such skill, couldn't help but smile. Well, he said to the room at large, I believe this calls for a celebration. Antoine, please make sure every table receives a complimentary glass of our finest champagne. The maitre moved quickly to comply, relief and joy evident in his bearing. As the evening drew to a close, the story of what had happened at Le Maison d'Or was already spreading through Boston's restaurant community. Social media buzzed with accounts from dinner guests who had witnessed the extraordinary scene. But what made the incident truly memorable wasn't just the public humbling of an arrogant manager, it was the lesson in leadership and humanity that Karoline had demonstrated. The next day, when Thompson arrived for his first shift as a busboy, he found the staff surprisingly supportive. They had witnessed true leadership the night before, and it had inspired them to show the same grace and professionalism their new CEO had demonstrated. If you've been inspired by this story of how true leadership transforms arrogance into opportunity, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We bring you these powerful moments of justice served with wisdom and grace. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that real authority doesn't come from putting others down, it comes from lifting them up. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone's arrogance was perfectly corrected by quiet authority? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to stay updated on more incredible stories of justice served with perfect professionalism.